بسم الله الرحمن الرحیم. د افغانستان لومړی میرمن جناب سالیس، جناب استاد دانش، جناب دکتر سیب عبدالله، جناب قاضی القضات، محترمه سفیر بلایند، سفرای محترم، اعضای محترم کابینه، اعضای محترم ولوسی و مشران جرگه، جامعه مدنی، رسانه‌ها، تمام خواهرها و برادران، السلام علیکم و رحمت الله و برکاته. به اجازهتان ما به انگلیسی صحبت میکنم. The right to have rights is the foundation of orderly society. Let me pay tribute to those Afghan patriots, particularly our martyrs in the Afghanistan National Defense and Security Forces, civilians, men and women who for their patriotic duties have endured sacrifices and are daily defending the values of this country. Let me also thank all our sisters and brothers who, in solidarity with displaced people, with war-affected people, and with drought-affected people, are sharing their half of bread and opening their homes and hearts to those who are suffering from the effects of COVID, Corona, and displacement, drought, and war. I'd like to thank all my fellow Afghan men and women for their support for our security forces. In the last 100 years, this support has been unprecedented, and it's reinforced there since. I would also like to thank the ulama, the private sector, women, youth, and civil society for choosing voice over exit. Staying in Afghanistan means defending Afghanistan and believing in the future of Afghanistan. Thank you for participating with your cogent voices in explaining what is at stake at this moment. I'd like to thank Dr. Abdul for his stewardship of the High Council on Peace, and we'll be hearing from him regarding that priority. Let me share some of the recent reforms as an indicator. On July 26, we completed a full cycle of electronic payment of salaries between the Ministry of Finance, the Civil Service Commission, in the Central Bank of Afghanistan. Within a month, all salaries, inshallah, will be paid electronically. This is a tremendous achievement, and I'd like to congratulate all my colleagues that have spent day and night in realizing it. The Central Bank of Afghanistan also is now in a position to open a banking account for every Afghan who desires one. Next week, we will reach the target of 6 million electronic IDs. All these programs and dozens more on digitalization of the state are done by Afghan intellectual capital. And I salute those men and women who again have been educated in some of the world's best universities, have returned and are doing their duty to transform our country. The departments of Budget and Treasury of the Ministry of Finance are being overhauled. We can assure you that within a month, every request for payment that is legible and legal will be processed within 3 hours instead of rows. Madam Lyons spoke of the challenge of the budget. We've cut our budget by 5.2%. All non-essential expenditure is eliminated, but services will be prioritized and the needs of the security sector will be addressed. Although the war is proceeding and we are under an all-out attack, the construction of Surubi 2, a 180 megawatt plant, has begun with our own resources, as well as the construction of one of the longest canals in our history in northern Afghanistan. Let me be categorical and state that we are committed to enhancing the role of the Afghan women in the government and their economic empowerment. Let the differentiation on this issue between us and Taliban be crystal as day and night. We stand for the rights of our sisters as women. And we are very proud of the role that they are playing and the visible demonstration of their effectiveness and representation. Even a quick glance at pictures or maps between 2001 and today will show you that Afghanistan of today is a vastly transformed space. I've flown over the cities of Herat, Mazar, Jalabad, Khost, and visited with them as well as Kabul. These were small little towns 20 years ago. Each of Mazar and Herat, or you have to fly about 10 to 15 kilometers over. I indicate this because Afghans have created assets, they have properties, and they have capabilities. This needs to be appreciated because it's these capabilities and assets. In defending the Republic, we're defending ourselves, our own homes, our own values, and the future of our children. We, of course, are facing the triple challenge. COVID-19, severe drought and climate change. It's not just the drought, it's climate change in its full effect. Most of Afghanistan is between 2 to 12 degrees warmer this year compared to last year. Displacement, destruction, and disruption unleashed by Taliban and their supporters. This requires avoiding blame games and focusing on the present. We need to focus our efforts and make the hard choices that are necessary. To survive and thrive, we must demonstrate to our people that we are their servants. For me, it's the greatest privilege of my life to have the honor to serve and represent the men and women who constitute the source of our sovereignty today. Let me return to the question of peace. Our collective right as a people to peace has been under constant attack for 43 years. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights is focused on individual rights, but Afghanistan has been denied as a nation its collective right to peace and stability. Acting on the consensus of our fellow citizens, we, the elected government, have pursued peace as our priority. We prepared earnestly by drawing lessons from global examples and national experience, secured the first comprehensive ceasefire in 4 decades in 2018, and were poised for direct negotiations with the Taliban. Then the international community took over the peace process. The Lower Jirga took the unprecedented step of releasing 5,000 hardened Taliban fighters and some of the largest drug dealers under the assurance by the international community of their good conduct. I offer the bridge to peace through holding of early elections, and we stand by it. The Taliban and their supporters, however, by contrast, engaged in an all-out war and are determined to impose themselves by the judgment of the sword. The jihadi and radical networks and transnational terrorists and criminal organizations are fully mobilizing in support of their Taliban allies in return for future reciprocity. Ambassador Lyons, I agree with other things, but it's foreigners who are still killing Afghans. At least 10,000 members of these groups, plus others, have entered our country and have given themselves the right to kill our innocent civilians and bring disruption. The war is not a civil war. Please understand that it is still a war of networks and criminalized and terrorist networks. If we miss that dimension and reduce it just to a war between Afghans, we'll be missing the big picture. We are facing a moment of truth regarding their beliefs, our priorities, and the need for reforms. To ensure a lasting political settlement, we must seize the moment to mobilize our fellow citizens in a movement of national resistance under the leadership of the Afghan National Defense and Security Forces. Please let me assure all our international colleagues, no one in this country wants militias. A national resistance movement, our closest example in Afghanistan is the Swiss Army. We have been soldier farmers for centuries, and it's in defense of our homes. And the request everywhere is for leadership to be provided by the active and retired members of the security and defense forces of Afghanistan. And I'm delighted to say that thousands of retired officers and men are volunteering again. To have a tomorrow, we must be counted today. Allah's injunction is clear. Those who refuse peace must be faced with full determination. Our diverse and united country is now determined to defend the gains of the past 20 years and the generations that have gone before that. Let me assure you that we have the political will, a national narrative, an action plan, and the deep reservoirs of patriotism to seize the moment. As a nation, we've defied odds repeatedly and will do it, inshallah, again. I'd like to thank you, distinguished ambassadors and members of the diplomatic community, for your presence in Kabul and here today. Your presence symbolizes your commitment to our agreed end state of a sovereign, united, Islamic, democratic, peaceful, and connected Afghanistan. We thank the leaders of your countries and yourselves for the immense work that you've done to reach agreement globally and regionally on this end state. Framing the present as a commencement of a new chapter in the narrative of our partnership is crucial. Let me again state for the record, we take the decision by President Biden and NATO to be irreversible. We've never asked for change of that decision. We will not. It's a sovereign decision and a collective decision by our partners. We Afghans must now own our future and be willing to endure the sacrifices that that future requires, but your principled assistance is much appreciated. Supporting a value-based approach to your assistance, as just again articulated by Ambassador Lyons today, and in the future, joining us in our emphasis on citizen rights, women's rights, and the rights of children, youth, and other categories, our beautifully diverse and united nation, is much appreciated. Adherence to your Geneva commitments, diplomatic support, and humanitarian assistance is the need of the hour. I very much look forward to the opportunity for exchange of views, to review and adjust our agenda for cooperation in the coming months and years. Against tradition, I'll be staying to listen to you and then leave after the photo opportunity. What was our initial narrative in response to President Biden's and the NATO decision? These decisions were game-changing events, forcing all actors around in the conflict in our country to frame their responses to the resulting uncertainty. We expressed respect for the decision and quickly offered a narrative around the opportunity, risks, turbulence, and threats. I had the honor to socialize the narrative to the cabinet and through a presentation at Kabul University that was watched by 6 million people within 2 days to our citizens. For us, the departure provides the opportunity to own our problems and to secure our future with determination, unity, and sacrifice. Preoccupation with ensuring departure of NATO and US troops resulted in loss of alignment between us and our partners. I am pleased, however, to indicate that we are approaching the new chapter of our partnership with a true sense of urgency, mutual understanding, and mutual respect. What are the key components of our narrative, our national narrative today? First, our Islamic identity. As a 99.9% Muslim society, Islamic values and injunctions constitute our cosmology, the deepest sense of our being and becoming, our shared notions of accountability in both here and hereafter. Our Constitution, providing the rules of the game for our rights and obligation, is judged the most Islamic constitution in the world. The name of the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan expresses the dominant cultural framework of our political and social relationships. From the inception of Islam, we, the Afghans, have been a center of Islamic learning, deep spirituality, tolerance, and formation of networks that have been instrumental in the formation of the ethos of Islam as a culture and civilization. Maulana Rumi, one of our gifts to the world and one of the most widely read poets in the world today, expressed our values best. And I quote, "The religion of love is like no other religion." The emphasis placed on knowing the self through the discipline of the heart, following the Quranic injunctions, have been central to the collective labor of the Sufis and our ulama through the ages. Shrines built around the tombs of major spiritual figures originating from Afghanistan dot the landscape in Pakistan and India. They did not go with the sword. They went with love. Our distinguished ulama fully participated in the preparation, discussion, and adoption of the Constitution of 2004 by the Lower Jirga. Our Constitution of 1924, as fully documented, was the product of the collective labor of Islamic networks led by Afghan jurists and had no Western involvement. It is important to understand that today's Afghanistan was not born 20 years ago. It's hundreds of years of collective work and millennia of functioning as a center and a roundabout of civilizations. Our negotiating team in Doha is repeatedly invited the Taliban team to discuss peacemaking within the framework of the Holy Quran and Sharia. To them, however, their agreement with the US constitutes the only frame of reference. Having repeatedly suffered from lack of rules for orderly succession during the 18th, 19th, and 20th centuries, as well as the preceding millennia, our collective wisdom arrived at a presidential system with term limits as the solution. If there is any doubt regarding support for the Republican system as a mode of governance, let the Taliban participate in a fully internationally supervised election or referendum. The debate now is within Islam. The international forces are gone. You're not part of the conflict. Opting for our historically inclusive and tolerant tradition, or a recently articulated dogma formulated in reaction to the world. The consensus of prominent Islamic scholars from all over the world, including Pakistani scholars expressed in Saudi Arabia, thank you, Mr. Halimi, that the war by the Taliban is no religious justification, is crystal clear and heartening. This is not a fight for Islam. It's a fight for monopolistic power. Sovereignty. Sovereignty resides in the Afghan people who, through fair and free elections, entrusted to their elected leaders for a limited period, subject to accountability of these leaders, including impeachment and removal from the highest office in the land. Our right to statehood has been won through the sacrifice of our ancestors during the past 274 years. All attempts in the 19th century and 20th century to colonize us failed. We are proud not to have had separatist movements. Within our Republican order, sovereignty is the instrument of delivery of citizenship rights. All the rights of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights are included in the fundamental rights of citizens enshrined in Chapter 2 of the Constitution, with the state held responsible for protection and consolidation of citizens' rights, including the equality of men and women as full citizens. Should the need for amendment of the Constitution arise, the Islamic character of the state cannot be amended, and the basic rights can only be improved. The departure of the international forces gives us the opportunity to frame and implement our sovereignty strategies in the manner suited to our unique conditions in history, as well as the benefits of regional connectivity and global cooperation. Please do not pronounce the end of connectivity. We will overcome. State building, market building, and peace building are pillars of a sovereignty strategy in service of equal citizens of a nation, united in safeguarding of the achievements of the past 20 years and expanding the platform for stability and prosperity. National unity. As a nation, we are composed of people living in Afghanistan, residing in other countries as refugees, our diaspora, who again have done a fantastic job in the struggle against COVID and drought, and people who by sentiment and history consider themselves Afghan. Billions of bonds emanating from our sense of common past and converging hopes and aspirations of tens of millions of men and women, girls and boys, unites us in experiencing common joy and common pain. The children of Afghanistan must be the focus of our attention. This is a generation that has been raised on a sense of opportunity. Please do not turn, do not stay silent as other forces try to turn their lives into hell and deny them the beautiful sense of childhood and aspirations. We acknowledge our subnational identities in the national anthem that you just heard, where names of all major name groups are recited, and we also celebrate our linguistic richness. Our Constitution is recognized Pashto and Dari as official languages and all our other languages as national languages in the third official language in the place where the majority speaks that language. The Constitution has enabled us to frame our demands on the state in terms of citizenship rights and voice our aspirations and frustrations in the public arena openly. That's the beauty of democracy. The give and take is intense, and of course, criticism is massive, as it should be. But the acknowledgement of progress is equally heartening. The right to have rights is enabling us to reflect on the past, engage the present, and have claims on the future. The key issue of a free citizenry is to claim rights on other citizens, and particularly on the state. We ask the leader of Taliban to show himself to the Afghan people and respond to a conversation with Afghan men and women in an open format. As my colleagues around me, Dr. Sabah Abdullah, the Vice President, and I do routinely. Our common refrain during the past 43 has been our need for a strong state institutions to serve the needs of a strong nation. Let me immediately clarify. Strong state institution does not mean authoritarian. It means accountable and responsive. Strong in delivery of citizen rights. Strong in accountability, strong in transparency, not strong in claims of elitism. Our egalitarian ethos, strong sense of self, traditions of open competition for leadership at various levels of society, deep roots in our Islamic identity, and pride in our past as an Asian roundabout, a center for major civilization, from the Vedic, Zoroastrian, Buddhist, Greek, Hindu, and then Islam as our grand synthesis of these civilizations, has made us a crossroad for interaction. Every major province of this country is served as a center of a state or an empire. Both geology and geography favor national unity, as our resources are incredibly well distributed, particularly our natural capital being concentrated in the 10 poorest provinces. The Hindu Kush, as the French archaeologists long ago recognized, has been a mountain of unity, not division. National programs are the vehicle that will transform the community of sentiment and imagination into a community of interest in mutual knowledge. 5 years ago, we promised you that 50% of the councils in the villages will be managed by Afghan women. We've fulfilled this. Now, hundreds of millions of dollars are being handled and spent through democratic participation. Even among our Kuchi community, over 30% of the councils are now formed by women and managed by them. Digitalization of the state, society, and economy will allow us to overcome the inherited dilemmas of centralization and decentralization. Democracy is a platform permitting for voice and participation, forcing us to acknowledge and listen to each other, question the use of our resources, set priorities, and take pride in our accomplishment as individuals, whether it's our Olympic champions, football team, or cricket team, or others. Groups in a nation. Our patriotism is strong in a reason that predictions of diplomats, generals, scholars, spies, and statesmen regarding our response during the past 200 years have proven off the mark. There's a level of humility required of all of us predicting the demise of Afghanistan. As Bernard Shaw said, the rumors of his death are widely exaggerated. Support for the NDSF is one of our strongest manifestations of our national unity. Bridge to peace. Obtaining the gift of peace is our deepest desire and our top priority. Our developmental narrative revolving around the efficient, effective, and equitable utilization of our capitals, capabilities, locational, cultural, and social advantages is owned by millions of us, but depends on peace. Afghanistan can be prosperous, Afghanistan can be self-reliant, Afghanistan can be a hub of connectivity, but this all depends on a political settlement. Keenly aware of the momentous transformation of Asia into a continental economy and a hub of the fourth industrial revolution, we are determined to turn our location in the heart of Asia into a dynamic roundabout in a central place of connectivity. We've articulated a widely supported program for a bridge from an all-out war to a just and lasting peace through a political settlement. We do not see a military solution. We firmly believe in a political solution, and therefore our distinguished colleague, particularly under the leadership of Dr. Abdullah, have continued the effort and will continue the effort. To achieve the agreed upon end state, we suggest an urgent review of the assumptions and the processes that led us to the current impasse in the peace process. Not to blame, but to accelerate the momentum toward the political solution. Connectivity. There is a regional consensus on connectivity as a critical driver of stability and prosperity. I thank the President and the people of Uzbekistan for hosting the recent conference on regional connectivity, where again, despite concerns and anxieties about the security situation, the consensus was stronger than ever. Large programs such as TAPI, the CASA 1000, the Surkhan Pulakhumri 1000 megawatt transition line, the Mazar Sharif Kabul Peshawar Railway, the Khafirat Railway, and other projects are important. But what is really crucial is a regional consensus on how to use the assets and capabilities of the fourth industrial revolution to create the infrastructure associated with the first industrial revolution, namely railways and roads, and the second industrial revolution, namely power and electricity. Agreement on rules governing flows of goods, people, and guarantees on functioning of value chains and supply chains is going to be indispensable for lifting tens of millions of people through cooperation. The key to lifting millions of people in Pakistan, tens of millions of people in Pakistan and Afghanistan, lies in agreement on a stable and peaceful Afghanistan. Otherwise, all the consensus that has been reached will be wasted and poverty will increase instead of decreasing. Our case for regional engagement in this critical juncture of our history rests on our firm belief that the interests of all our neighbors, near and far, lie in a stable and prosperous Afghanistan. Resorting to proxy wars or attempts at hegemony will produce a lose-lose-lose outcome for all of us. I warn you about the risks of proxy wars. Once they start, witness Lebanon, Iraq, Syria, Yemen, Algeria, and other places, they're very difficult to contain. This vision, this national narrative that now is owned by millions of us, is under threat. In terms of scale, scope, and timing, we're facing an invasion that is unprecedented in the last 30 years. These are not the Taliban of the 20th century coming from isolated madrasas, but the manifestation of the nexus between transnational terrorist networks and transnational criminal organizations. It's one of the wealthiest insurgency movements on earth. Their links to drugs, to smuggling, to robbing of our natural resources is unprecedented. And those who encourage and participate with them, of course, are beneficiaries. The simultaneity of the offensive in 31 provinces is a massive departure from the pattern of the past 5 years, where at most 10 provinces came under attack, simultaneous attack, indicating planning and management by a trained general staff and provisioning of supply chains and access to reserves of fighters and resources. We can judge the existence of a general staff by the sophistication of the planning. Their identities need to be established by an international commission and observers from the UN. A massive flux, as I earlier mentioned, particularly of Jcmb and Lashkar-e-Taiba, known for their activities, well known for their activities, is giving the war a regional international dimension. Planting of carpet mining, car bombs, suicide bombing, summary executions, revenge killings, forced marriages constitute a recurrent pattern of violation of human rights. Listen to our people. In this age of instant communication, just see the videos. We call on the international community to review the narrative of the willingness of the Taliban and their supporters on embracing a political solution. For 2 years, the international community assumed a narrative of a cooperative Taliban and questioned our judgments and our request for considerations of acting on lessons learned. Today, I think it's urgent that we review the situation. What's our security strategy? We've taken stock of our conditions, both in the institutions in the capital and through provincial trips and consultations. The objective of our short-term security strategy is to produce a military stalemate, thereby demonstrating to the Taliban and their supporters the necessity of a just and enduring peace through a political settlement. Let me repeat. The objective of our military strategy is a stalemate because we firmly believe that a military conquest is not the solution. A political settlement is the enduring solution. The major building blocks are as follows: marshalling public support into a unified voice in support of the Republic and the Afghan National Defense and Security Forces. Prioritization of use of force through concentration of forces and economy of effort around strategic objectives and terrain. This involves hard choices, and we have to make it and give the resources and support to our defense and security sector leaders. Defense of the current situation and support for heroic efforts of our urban and rural defense. Let me just acknowledge the role of agency in history. Individuals have really done heroic deeds. Towns have engaged in heroic collective action. Our security leaders, our governors, our jihadi figures, across the board, men and women, have risen and demonstrated their capacity for leadership, their capacity for sacrifice, and their capacity for standing for what they believe in. Stabilization of conditions and enhancement of ANDSF capacities and capabilities. We will spend our own money. We will stop doing other things because our survival is at stake. Investing in enablers for and addressing the needs of the ANDSF. Then, strategic offensive. These are not sequential measures because conditions in different parts of the country differ greatly from host, where every single attack of the Taliban has been successfully defeated, to other places which are facing existential threats. Reforms in prioritization of use of resources is critical. The budgets of Ministry of Defense, Ministry of Interior, and all 5 top ministries spending the bulk of the resources of the country will come under immense scrutiny, and every resource will be reallocated. Misallocation of resources would be contained. And then, critically, and one of the issues that all you colleagues have raised, strategic communication. Repeating what the agenda is and building it through. Judgment and patience are required. We cannot rush onto things. While we celebrate the heroism of our officers and soldiers, putting them at risk is not right. So the sequence will be left, judgment will be left, decision authorities will be delegated by the Minister of Defense, Chief of Staff, the Minister of Interior, and the Directorate of National Security. The implementation of the strategy requires hard choices and constant attention to elimination of corruption and cronyism. Our dialogue, particularly the Vice President, First Vice President has been with me. The rank and file resent both cronyism and corruption. Their demand for effective utilization, transparent utilization of both promotions and appointments and use of resources is critical. Bravery and initiative will be recognized, celebrated, and rewarded. Let me turn very briefly, because we are going to have a discussion on the economy, drought, and governance. What are some of the global trends? First, there is consensus that radical uncertainty is the condition of humanity and for the next decade. We know how to cope with radical uncertainty. Now I think it's the time for the whole world. Models assuming stability, particularly in the sphere of economy and finance, are going to be of very limited value. The Washington consensus on development is becoming obsolete. The new narrative of development is a very different narrative. Collective wisdom, through the articulation of reference narrative, is going to be critical to overcoming the third wave of global distrust, harnessing the power of the fourth industrial revolution for the benefit of the people, dealing with climate change, in containing, in hopefully overcoming the fifth wave of terrorism. The level of inequality within countries, in between countries, has never been greater. It is a challenge to stability. Millions of youth unemployed cannot be asked to wait. The waiting generations need addressing. The fourth industrial revolution, through technological convergence, is accelerating change in a speed that the world of 2030 could be radically different from today. Please avoid giving us earlier technologies, one generation or two generation, or out-of-date advice. We need to be current, and we need to understand. Technical assistance particularly needs revisiting. What's its relevance in the light of these fast-changing trends? The reset caused by COVID-19 is accelerated the digitalization of economy and society by judgment of Professor Klaus Schwartz by at least 10 years. The future delivery of services is going to be digital. Already, the leading companies of the world are delivering 60% of their technical assistance without stepping foot in a country. The choice of economic models, again, to quote Professor Klaus Schwartz and others, is between state capitalism and stakeholder capitalism. State functions are expanding because of market failures and demands for distinctive protecting functions to be performed in the face of inequality and rapid technological change. The state is back in. Please do not ignore it. Experience has shown that state functions can be shared, but they cannot be delegated. While the middle classes and urban populations are expanding, a tale of two middle classes might emerge. Dynamic middle classes in Asia and Africa, and stagnant middle classes in the OECD countries. Asia's transformation into a continental economy and Africa's development are likely to be world transformative events of this decade, resulting in very strong regional patterns. Let me turn to our immediate challenge. And the key symbols for me are collaborative governance. During the past 20 years, we've had to deal with the coexistence of parallel ecosystems, each with its distinctive rules and resources. The military contractor, economic governance, and cultural ecosystem. This was the largest actor in Afghanistan without coordination with the government and having its own decisions and distinctive patterns. Second, the non-profit ecosystem. Third, the foreign aid systems with off-budget expenditure as the dominant pattern and reliance on layers of contractors as the dominant mechanism of delivery. Usually, contracts went through 5 layers. Process based on budget assistance, with weak ownership by government organizations and overemphasis on process rather than outcomes. Dealing with this level of complexity is required rethinking of governance from a purely hierarchical system to a collaborative enterprise. Comparative analysis, however, demonstrates that collaborative governance, particularly delegation of state functions to the market and non-profit sectors, requires more capacity in the government than less. There's no substitution. It's just the government must have a different capacity to collaborate. The division of Afghan economy into formal, informal, and criminal economies with distinctive institutional arrangement makes the task of focusing on market building and on equity and equality even more urgent. What are my proposals? First, I'm proposing a compact with the nonprofit sector. Given the urgency of the humanitarian crisis, the nonprofit sector, the government, and our distinguished developmental partners must come together. First, two general observations, but we want to go against the trend. Romantic notions of the nonprofit sector as representative of virtue in the 1990s have been replaced by self-examination, public and scholarly scrutiny, government regulations, and demand for accountability by stakeholders. In Europe and the United States, outsourcing of social services to the nonprofits has forced the nonprofit sector to choose between what Professor Salomon is described as the survival imperative and the distinctiveness imperative, with the former constituting the dominant trend. The level of scrutiny for receiving a contract for performing social services in European countries is the highest in the world, and has chosen a lot of nonprofits to cut salaries and benefits. Equally, the regulations, particularly at the state level in the United States, are becoming a general trend. We propose a strategy of collaborative governance with the nonprofit sector and the developmental community based on two-part component. Part one, to reach a compact for a 1 year between the government, development partners, and the nonprofit sector based on: one, adoption of the voluntary standards of international NGOs or revising of the national standard. These standards have been reviewed. We're comfortable with them. Second, agreement on mechanisms of accountability and transparency using either the One World Trust framework, that is, all the indicators, the relevant indicators and measurements, or another agreed framework. Three, disclosure of information to all stakeholders based on United Nations, Department of Statistics, national account standards that are very clear on what constitutes the nonprofit sector. And fourth, agreed enforcement mechanism in case of non-compliance. This could be done, like in Pakistan, through a third party or other mechanisms that are credible, or ultimately by the government. Part two is to reach agreement on a law to provide the enabling environment on the basis of national, regional, and global experience, with the help of global foundations and national stakeholders. The law must be consultative. Our previous efforts have failed. We cannot impose a hierarchical model. It doesn't suit the conditions of today. So I'm really asking for a true collaboration in this regard. Let me take a moment to acknowledge some of the outstanding work that has been done by organizations like the Swedish Committee that have stayed with us for decades, the emergency hospital that, again, I've had the misfortune of visiting very frequently, dozens of others, national and international. They are equally bad examples, and the issue is to avoid putting everybody in the same basket and to make sure that the enabling environment is created. Our second proposal is on market building. The market needs to be approached as an ecosystem, not reduced to the private sector. We've come with a framework, and I'll just highlight a couple of points about this. The enablers for a market formation strategy fall in three categories. Government enablers, which is enabling environment, particularly through laws, property rights, and infrastructure. Joint enablers, risk management strategies, human capital, digitalization and technology strategies, banking and finance, and then private sector enablers, firms and clusters value chain, supply chain. Let me take a moment to thank from the bottom of my heart the efforts of the Afghan private sector. Yesterday, again, I had a 2.5-hour meeting with them. They are ensuring the stability of food prices and supplies. They have turned. They've leaned backward to ensure that their fellow citizens are fed, clothed, or provided with essential goods. They've only one request: reform of the bureaucracy, overcoming of the obstacles that either personal greed or institutional failure puts in their way. This is an extremely important group, and our efforts and their views on the evolving situation are extremely important. Lastly, the urgency of state building. The state performs functions that the society requires of it. We're not coming at a theoretical perspective from the state that the state should do this or that. It's what our people ask us. COVID-19 was a clear example. Within weeks, we delineated the first wave, and the focus of the people was for urgent action for relief and recovery. We must be guided in moments of radical uncertainty by the collective wisdom of our people, and I'm extraordinarily proud of our collective judgments, the sense of collective judgment. The question is effectiveness, efficiency, transparency, and accountability, not dogmatic beliefs regarding the essential nature of state. The state does not have an essence. It's what people require of it. We propose 8 national programs that my colleagues will subsequently explain as a platform of our partnership and as the key pillars linking society, the budget, and our international partners. A balanced scorecard, specially designed for these national programs, is shared. The balanced scorecard was really made for the private sector, but we've adapted it to this, and we are willing to ensure predictable flow of resources. We propose condition-based disbursement. Like the EU's state building contract or the incentive program of international development organizations, the World Bank, Asian Development Bank, and the ARTF. Like you, Ambassador Lyons, would like to see a shift from process-based projects to outcome-based programs. $4 billion is stuck, while the country, 18 million, are suffering. Today, with digitalization and the 6 million IDs, we're in a position to deliver directly cash to the bank accounts of individuals. We can and must revisit, and from our side, 4 of the national programs are again being reorganized and prioritized to deal with the drought, displacement, and COVID-19 negative impacts. Let me conclude. I hope it's come clear that we have a sense of urgency to deal with an existential crisis regarding the well-being of our people, regarding the future of our children, and regarding our rights to have opinions and to have rights. I hope that this meeting will become the mechanism for sharing our sense of urgency in transforming our cooperation into a mutually urgent set of actions that will serve the immediate and as well as the medium-term interests of the Afghan people. A stable Afghanistan, let me repeat again, is in everybody's interest. Your diplomatic engagement to persuade those powers and actors that see chaos as beneficial, in war as ground for projection of hegemony are essential. Your voice is required. 20 years of our collaboration where use of force was a dominant feature of our daily lives is over, will not be returning to it. Afghans forever, if defended this homeland, we're very grateful for the support and our very difficult hours of need, but now it's a different environment, a different context, and together we must shape those areas that are falling within the new chapter of our relationship. Thank you. Till the Afghanistan, Yashasana Afghanistan, Zindabad Afghanistan.